صل على رسوله الكريم. Once a person has established their connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by believing in Him as He is and acknowledging His divine attributes, expressing those attributes, it comes time for the slave who has recognized his master to pledge his allegiance to this master. And the pledge of allegiance to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or what we call submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is in fact a voluntary submission. It is something that no one can force another to do. We say, إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ. Now, إِيَّاكَ is to emphasize that it is only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in this, the first aspect, or the initial aspect of Tawheed is introduced, which is that a person does not bring anyone else as a partner in their worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this happens in a few ways. The first is obviously they will not worship anyone other than Allah. The second aspect is that they will not worship Allah but in the way that Allah wants them to worship Him. This is the second aspect. A person says, "Oh Allah, I'm just worshipping you, but I'm going to do it the way I want." So this will not be considered as ibadah by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if it does not comply with the method given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The other thing is that the worship is done on the terms designated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is not done on our terms. In other words, our moods, our desires, our lack of motivation or excess of motivation is not what we will make the basis of our worship. Rather, the basis of our worship will be to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The next aspect of this is that when we say إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ and we translate it as worship, we should understand that worship is translating only a part of this word. It is not the complete translation of this word. Because عَبَدَ يَعْبُدُ in the Arabic language has several meanings. The actual meaning is to be the slave, to be in servitude of someone, to live in complete servitude of someone. So, na'budu literally means that it is only you that we enslave ourselves to. We are only your slaves. And it makes sense also, because if we were to translate this as worship, then let's count the worships. Count the worships that have been mandated as official worships. So you have salat, which is 5 times a day. Then you have zakat, which is once a year. Siyam is 1 month a year. Hajj is once in a lifetime, as mandated. Then what other acts of worship do you have? You have dua, it's worship. The dhikr of Allah through adhkar, it's worship. Recitation of Quran, it's worship. So then what's left? If this is worship, then, the worships that have been mandated in Quran and Hadith. So the question is, then how much of our lives are actually dedicated to these acts? And what percentage of the life of humanity at large, Muslims at large, is dedicated to these acts? It's actually a very small portion of their lives. Salat will take cumulatively maybe an hour of their day, maybe an hour and a half of their day. But that still leaves the question of the remaining 22 and a half hours. And how much dhikr does a person actually do? Even people that do a great deal of dhikr, how much time do they spend doing dhikr? Maybe an hour in a day. And the other worships are the same. Even if somebody is praying nawafil, they're praying extra salat. Somebody's reading a little bit extra Quran. But on the average, this all makes up for a very small percentage of the day. So if we say Iyyaka na'budu means, okay, we are doing these worships exclusively for you. If we were to translate it in this way, but then what are we doing with the rest of our lives? Does that mean that the rest of our lives are spent the way we want to? It doesn't make sense. Rather, this is a voluntary submission that we give ourselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and pledge to live our lives by Him. So we are His slaves and worshippers, whether we are in salat or out of salat. Otherwise, what the meaning would be is that we will not bring in any partners when we worship you. But that's limited to our worship. The rest of our lives, we will designate for ourselves how to spend that time and how to use those lives. And this would mean then that there are some acts of worship that the Muslim is doing in certain parts of the day that make up for a percentage of the day, but the rest of the life, the remaining 20 hours or so, are going to be spent by their own desires. How can this person be a slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if the slavery is limited to just a small portion of their lives? So the pledge in this ayat is actually, it's to pledge servitude and submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when I say pledge, it's like an undertaking. We are committing ourselves. Iyyaka na'budu. It is only you that we enslave ourselves to. It is only you whose slaves we are. And another aspect of this is that if we do not bring ourselves into the complete slavery of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then what will happen? We will be slaves of Allah in salat and slaves of someone else out of salat. We'll be slave of Allah when says Allahu Akbar and is in qiyam and ruku' and sujood. But it could be that after that, someone becomes a slave of money, someone becomes a slave of dunya, some other aspect of dunya, someone becomes slaves of their desires. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about these people. Allah Azza wa Jal speaks of these people who have become enslaved by all of these things. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, one hadith, he says, Ta'isa abdul dinar, wa ta'isa abdul dirham, wa ta'isa abdul qatifa. That person who has enslaved himself to the dinar, to the dirham, and to their possessions, may they be ruined. He calls him a slave of these possessions, a slave of these things. أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَى وَأَضَلَّهُ اللَّهُ عَلَىٰ عِلْمٍ وَخَتَمَ عَلَىٰ سَمْعِهِ وَقَلْبِهِ وَجَعَلَ عَلَىٰ بَصَرِهِ غِشَاوَةً فَمَن يَهْدِيهِ مِن بَعْدِ اللَّهِ. Allah says, have you seen that person who has made his desires his God? So they could be worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at some part of the day, but the rest of their lives generally are revolving around another system, another set of values, another set of priorities, and so on and so forth. This is not Islam. So in Islam, the first step, this Iyyaka na'budu, is the first step into Islam, is that a person willingly submits to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is such a master that He does not need this submission. The masters of the world need our submission. They cannot do what they do without their slaves. In the days when slavery was all over the world, the master needed that slave. That's why he would go to the market and buy that slave. Their work depended on it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not depend on us for anything. He does not need us for anything. So we enslave ourselves to a master who does not need us, but rather accepts us. He says, okay, you can come. And it is a master that we are in need of. We are completely dependent on Him. Completely dependent on His mercy, on His grant, for whatever it is that we have and whatever it is that we do. So the dependency is completely one-sided and it's completely voluntary. As I mentioned in the beginning, no one can force us to submit this way to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In worldly systems, people were forced into slavery. Nobody willingly became a slave. Slaves were created, generally speaking, through warfare, where captives of war were brought and they would be enslaved. And then after that, their progenies would also be slaves. But our submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is completely voluntary. It's a choice that we make, that we willingly make. In fact, we feel that this is the very objective of our lives. He has created us for this. And because these are very profound verses, they summarize the Quran. إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ summarizes the whole Quran. We'll go into it in a little bit more detail inshallah in the coming sessions. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى